Did you know? The Megami Tensei series started off as a licensed adaptation of digital devil story Megami Tensei, a 1986 sci-fi horror novel by Aya Nishitani. Although Atlus is primarily associated with the series, it wasn't the first studio to take a crack at turning the novel into a game. In July of 1987, 2 months before Atlus released their adaptation for the Famicom, Telenet Japan released digital devil story Megami Tensei on the MSX and PC-88. In contrast to Atlus's complex first-person dungeon crawler, Telenet's game was a relatively simple top-down action RPG. The title Megami Tensei means goddess metempsychosis in English. Metempsychosis is the unending process of birth, death, and rebirth that is of central importance to the Buddhist tradition. This belief can be seen throughout the series. In Megami Tensei, it refers to one of the characters being a reincarnation of the goddess IZUNAMI. In later games, though, the identity of the titular goddess is left up to the player's interpretation and can even function as a metaphor through the transformations Japan itself undergoes in each story. When development moved to the Super Nintendo, Atlus began creating new games under the name Shin Megami Tensei, which translates into new or true goddess metempsychosis. Instead of being based on Nishitani's novels, this new series followed original stories by Ito Ryutaro, who wrote the main script for Megami Tensei 2. After Shin Megami Tensei's success, Nishitani went on to write a new series of novels titled Shin Digital Devil Story, a rare case of the original stories being influenced by an adaptation. Early in development, Shin Megami Tensei's plot was meant to take place on a global scale. The conflict would start in Tokyo and spread across the entire world, ending in Israel. To keep the scope down, the game was ultimately confined to Tokyo's Kichijoji neighborhood, where series art director Kazuma Kaneko lived during the game's development. According to Kaneko, "We picked Kichijoji because I lived there, and at the time we're not allowed to use Kichijoji's main station, which got me the idea that there might be a kind of suspicious atmosphere coming from that place." The team was also inspired by Terminal Echo, a building in front of the station that became disused due to high rent. The idea of a huge building that no one entered, even though it was right by a populated residential neighborhood, sparked their imaginations, and Terminal Echo made it into the game as the Echo Building Dungeon. Shin Megami Tensei saw a number of spin-offs released during the PlayStation era, some of which made it to Western shores. The most well-known of these was 1996's Revelations Persona, which Atlus website states was the first Megami Tensei game to reach the West. However, 1 year prior, Atlus USA released Jack Bros for the Virtual Boy. The game is a twin-stick shooter starring Jack Frost, who was one of the series' most marketable demons who later became Atlus's mascot. It's widely considered to be one of the best games for the ill-fated Virtual Boy, and is highly prized by collectors, with the full box version having an asking price of over $500. Persona isn't the only Megami Tensei title to be released by Atlus USA under the Revelations label. Revelations, the Demon Slayer for Game Boy Color, is actually Japan's Megami Tensei Gaiden Last Bible. It's a top-down RPG similar to Dragon Quest, but with Megami Tensei's signature conversation system. Last Bible had 3 sequels for Game Boy Color and Super Famicom. It was also ported to the Game Gear, where it garnered enough interest for Sega to develop and publish their own sequel, Last Bible Special. Interestingly, as a first-person dungeon crawler set in Jerusalem, Special has more in common with the mainline Megami Tensei games than it does the rest of the spin-off Revelation series. The Megami Tensei series has frequently been compared to Nintendo's Pokemon franchise, especially as it gains exposure in the West. While fans are quick to point out that Shin Megami Tensei has been around a lot longer than Pokemon, Atlus did at one point try to capitalize on Pokemon's success with a kid-friendly Game Boy Color game called Devil Children. Like Pokemon, Devil Children came with 2 versions, Black Book and Red Book, each with their own unique monsters that must be traded to complete your collection. Unlike Pokemon, each version of Devil Children tells an entirely different story. A 3rd version, White Book, later served as a sequel to both games. 2 more generations of Devil Children games were made for the Game Boy Advance, Light Book and Dark Book, followed by Fire Book and Ice Book. Only the 2nd generation made it to North America under the title Demi-Kid's Light and Dark version. But in Japan, the franchise was successful enough to spawn 2 50-episode anime series as well as spin-offs of its own. These include a collectible card game for Game Boy Color and a puzzle game for Game Boy Advance, drawing further parallels to the Pokemon franchise. Japan also saw an Xbox-exclusive spin-off, Shin Megami Tensei 9, in 2002. The title refers to the 9 possible alignments the player can take within the game rather than its placement in the series. With real-time AI-driven battles similar to Final Fantasy XII, avatar customization features, and NPCs made to seem like other players in a virtual world, the game was originally developed as an MMO. Unfortunately, after numerous delays, it was scaled back to a single-player game with an online version set for future release. This online version of 9 was cancelled due to poor sales, but the series would eventually be turned into an MMO with Shin Megami Tensei Imagine, a joint production between Atlus and hardcore shmup developer Cave. In 2008, the free-to-play MMO was released in North America by Area Games, but it was short-lived. In 2014, the North American server was shut down, though the game is still running in Japan. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne was initially envisioned as something like an open-world game. By Kaneko's account, the original plan was to make the vortex like a battlefield for you to run around in. You could see into the distant horizon, and if you looked up into the sky, you could make out terrain features and houses way in the distance. We thought this would certainly be a dynamic spectacle, but it made the game respond poorly, so we put that aside. I hope we'll be able to do it someday. Nocturne was the first game in the main series to be localized for the West. The version that made it to our shores was actually the enhanced Maniacs edition of the game, which featured numerous balance tweaks, new difficulty settings, an extra dungeon, and a new ending. But the most prominent addition was the inclusion of Devil May Cry's Dante as a boss, and depending on your choices, a playable character. A new version of Nocturne Maniacs was bundled with Japanese special editions of Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Daido Kuzunoha vs King Abaddon. Devil Summoner protagonist Daido takes Dante's role in this version of the story, but otherwise is identical to the version with Dante. Dante's appearance wasn't the first time the series had drawn from popular culture. Steven, the wheelchair-bound creator of the demon summoning program, is modeled after world-renowned physicist Stephen Hawking. The Persona series' iconic Velvet Room was inspired by the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks. The decision to change its dominant color from red to blue is a nod to Blue Velvet, a classic film from Twin Peaks creator David Lynch. Even Nocturne's tattooed half-demon protagonist was influenced by pop culture. Kaneko says he was inspired by the music video Give It Away by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and he imagined the protagonist running around in the desert naked. Don't forget to subscribe to Did You Know Gaming for more facts and trivia, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. But hey, if you're hungry for more Shin Megami Tensei trivia, click that annotation to head over to my channel and check out my cultural breakdown on Persona's most deadly yet deep lore character, IZUNAMI. See you there!